The Digitech Bad Monkey, a little green overdrive pedal, sat in bargain bins for years, and players walked right past it. Forums called it a toy. Then, one online comparison put it head-to-head with a boutique drive that sells for thousands, and the two sounded almost identical. Within weeks, it was listed for hundreds, sometimes thousands. Nobody had ignored it because it sounded bad. They'd ignored it because it didn't have the right name on the box. And the whole guitar industry runs on that one reflex. If you love content that exposes the truth behind the gear you've been told to trust, hit that subscribe button and smash the like button so this video reaches more guitar players who deserve to know what's really going on. Under the hood, the Bad Monkey was basically an Ibanez Tube Screamer TS-808, and the gap everyone assumed was there just wasn't. So what else has the crowd been wrong about? These are 7 pedals players still ignore, still write off, still leave in the bargain bin, and every single one of them is a quiet goldmine sitting in plain sight. Number 7. The DoD 250 Overdrive Preamp. This is one of the oldest drive circuits in the entire Stompbox world, older than most of the boutique pedals that quietly borrow from it, and most players have never even tried one. It first showed up at the end of the 1970s in a plain gray box, built around an LM741 op-amp, and it does something very few modern overdrives bother to do. It doesn't just nudge the front of your amp politely. Back it off, and it's a clean preamp boost. Push it, and it digs into a raw, aggressive grind with a real edge. For decades, the boutique world built reputations on this exact circuit, charging 2 and 3 times the money for a nicer enclosure and a story about hand assembly. And the original just sat there the whole time, reissued in its familiar yellow box, going for budget money. People skip it because it looks plain, and because the name doesn't carry the same shine as the expensive copies, which is exactly why it's on this list. Run it low and it tightens everything up, adding just enough hair to make a clean channel sing. Run it hard and it gets nasty in the best way, with a mid-range bark that cuts through a band without you ever touching your volume. No tone controls to hide behind, no clever switching, just a raw, honest circuit that does one thing and does it brilliantly. You're paying for a design that's fueled hard rock and shred lead tone for decades, a design boutique builders have resold to you for years under prettier names, and you're paying almost nothing for it. The crowd walked past a founding father because he wasn't wearing a designer jacket, and the players who knew better never said a word, because why would they hand over their secret? A 2-knob box that turns a thin amp into something that snarls, for less than the cost of a night out, is the kind of thing you keep quiet about. Number 6. The Boss FZ5. Here's a fuzz an entire generation of players dismissed on sight, and for one silly reason. It uses modeling instead of an old transistor circuit, and the second the fuzz purists heard the word modeling, they stopped listening. Big mistake. The FZ5 hands you 3 of the most important fuzz voices in history in one small box. You get the smooth, singing sustain of a classic 60s fuzz. You get the spiky upper octave snarl behind some of the most famous lead tones ever put to tape. And you get that thick, woolly growl from the pedal that arguably started the whole fuzz craze in the first place. Real vintage versions of those 3 cost a small fortune, and even good reissues add up fast once you want all 3. Think about that for a second. To chase those 3 voices through vintage originals, you'd be spending more than the price of a decent used car, and even buying 3 separate modern reissues would run you several $100s and eat 3 slots on your board. The FZ5 gives you the lot in a single box, with a clean output and a build that survives years of abuse. It behaves itself, it tracks your picking, and it cleans up when you roll your guitar volume back. Players ignored it because purism told them to. But the truth is, most listeners can't tell the difference in a mix, and a fuzz lives in a mix, not under a microscope. The people who quietly kept theirs are sitting on one of the best fuzz bargains on the used market, while the purists who scoffed are still hunting for one good vintage unit they can't afford. Number 5. The Electro-Harmonix Soul Food. This one gets written off for a very specific, very snobbish reason. It's the affordable take on the Klon Centaur, a famously expensive transparent overdrive that's reached almost mythical status and sells used for prices that make grown adults wince. So when Electro-Harmonix put out a clean, well-built version for a tiny fraction of that money, the reaction from a certain crowd was completely predictable. They called it a fake. They insisted the real magic could only live in the expensive box, something to do with the Klon's specific germanium diodes and the way the clipping stage breathes. And then, here's what actually happened when people stopped reading the price tag and started listening. The Soul Food gives you that same open, slightly bright, almost clean push, the kind that adds harmonics and feel without smothering your tone. And it does it well enough that the difference just vanishes the moment a band kicks in. You can tweak it, mod it, stack it, and you'll have spent less than you would on a single cable from a boutique brand. The players who ignored it are still saving up for the legend. The players who bought it have been quietly using that exact tone for years. And here's the part the snobs never bring up. That transparent push is maybe the most useful kind of drive you can own, because it doesn't fight your amp or your other pedals. It just makes everything a little fatter, a little louder, a little more alive, which is the whole reason the Klon Centaur got famous in the first place. The Soul Food puts that on your board for the price of a pizza, and the only thing you give up is the right to brag about what the box cost. It even hides a switch inside that lets you pick true bypass or a buffered output, so it can sit up front in a long chain and keep your signal tight instead of getting swallowed. For a pedal the snobs call a fake, it solves more real problems than half the gear on their boards. Number 4, the ProCo RAT2. Now this one isn't obscure, and that's exactly the problem. It's so common that players look straight through it. It's on the wall of every shop, it's got a reputation as the cheap, slightly harsh option, and the cool crowd moved on to fancier distortion years ago. They were wrong, and they've stayed wrong. The RAT2 is one of the most versatile dirt boxes ever built, and underneath that plain gray housing sits an LM308 chip, a slow op amp that clips in a way nothing else quite replicates. Roll the distortion down and it's a thick, singing overdrive. Push it up and it turns into a snarling, aggressive distortion that's been on more famous records than almost any pedal you can name, and that filter control is a masterclass on its own, taking you from bright and cutting all the way to dark and smoky with one knob. That single control is why this thing has shown up on records across punk, grunge, metal, blues, and indie for decades, often on the boards of players who could afford literally anything and still reached for the cheap gray box. Kurt Cobain used one, David Gilmour used one, James Hetfield used one. When the same circuit shows up on records that different, that's not a coincidence, that's a great design. People complain that it doesn't sound like the original early version, and that complaint completely misses the point, because the RAT2 is its own classic, sitting there at a price that's barely moved in decades while everything around it has doubled. A legendary circuit, dirt cheap, ignored because it's too familiar to feel special. That's a gold mine that hides by being obvious. And think about how strange that really is. If this exact pedal had a boutique name and a $300 price tag, the same players who skip it would be lining up to praise its dynamics and its grit. The only thing standing between the RAT2 and full-blown worship is that it's too easy to buy and too cheap to feel like a trophy. That's not a flaw in the pedal, that's a flaw in how we shop. Number 3, the Danelectro Cool Cat Chorus. And now we're stepping into territory where ignored really does mean valuable. Danelectro spent years getting treated as a budget joke, a brand for toy store guitars and novelty boxes. But one very specific model bucks that reputation hard. The original 18-volt Cool Cat Chorus, the heavy die-cast version from the 1996 relaunch, which quietly turned into a genuine sleeper that players now seek out. Anyone who actually plugged one in found a lush, deep, three-dimensional modulation that rivals chorus pedals costing many times more, with a warmth a lot of modern digital units just can't reach. Word spread slowly, and then the prices started climbing. Here's the catch though. When Danelectro dropped it to a 9-volt supply in 1997, and again with the later reissues years after, the magic thinned out, so those newer ones don't sound the same and don't hold the same value, and most casual buyers never even realize there's a difference. They see the Danelectro name, they assume toy, and they scroll right past. Meanwhile, the people who learned to spot that early 18-volt unit have been buying them for small money and watching them appreciate. This is the cleanest example on the whole list. a pedal the crowd ignored for the dumbest reason imaginable, the name on the box, while it quietly became a collector's item right under their noses. And the lesson runs deeper than one chorus pedal. Danelectro has pulled this off more than once, putting out a brilliant early version of something, getting written off for the budget reputation, and then watching the originals climb while nobody connects the dots. Train your eye to spot that pattern, to look past the cheap brand, and check what the early units actually sound like, and you'll find value the rest of the market is too proud to even glance at. Number 2. The Behringer 5M1 Vintage Time Machine. And this is where the goldmine gets literal. Behringer pedals get mocked harder than almost anything in guitar because they're cut-price copies that cost about as much as lunch, and most players won't even consider them. But the Vintage Time Machine is a special case. It's an analog voiced delay clearly inspired by the Electro-Harmonix Deluxe Memory Man, that warm, modulated, tape-flavored echo players chase for their whole lives. The original Deluxe Memory Man still costs serious money today. The Behringer captured a huge amount of that character for a fraction of the price, and then the company discontinued it. The second it went out of production, the hunt was on. That bargain bin box everyone laughed at started showing up used at several times its original price, and clean ones with the box are getting genuinely hard to track down. Think about what that actually means. The cheapest, most mocked delay in the shop turned into a unit people now pay a premium to find, all because it nailed a sound that usually costs a fortune. The people laughing at the price missed the circuit inside it. And that's the trap with Behringer in general. Because the brand feels cheap and the prices are almost insulting, players assume the sound must be cheap too, and that assumption simply isn't always true. Some of their pedals are throwaways, sure, but a handful, the Vintage Time Machine included, are clever copies of genuinely great designs. And when one of those gets discontinued, the joke stops being funny and starts getting expensive. The smart move was never to laugh or sneer. The smart move was to plug it in, decide with your ears, and quietly grab the good ones before everyone else caught on. And that brings us to number 1, the Boss HM2 Heavy Metal. For about 20 years, this was the punchline of the entire pedal world. The cheap, scooped, buzzy distortion every kid bought as a teenager and dumped at the first opportunity, the one serious players treated as a relic of bad taste. And then something happened that nobody saw coming. A whole genre of heavy music, Swedish death metal, built around one very specific chainsaw-like guitar tone, traced that exact sound straight back to the HM2, and specifically to the older versions made in Japan. Producer Tomasz Skogsberg at Sunlight Studios in Stockholm used the HM2 as a core part of his recording chain, and the records that came out of that room defined an entire underground movement. Bands like Entombed built their guitar tone on that exact circuit. Later, producer Kurt Ballou helped carry that HM2 chainsaw sound into a whole new generation of heavy music, proving the pedal wasn't a relic at all. Suddenly, the most disposable pedal in the bargain bin was the secret weapon behind an entire underground movement. And the best part is how it was found. Nobody engineered that tone in a lab. A handful of broke teenagers with cheap gear cranked every knob to the maximum, the one setting the manual basically warns you against, and stumbled into a sound so brutal it defined a genre. The thing the design team would have called a mistake became the whole point. Those original Japanese-made units started climbing in value fast, and they kept right on climbing, to the point where Boss itself relaunched a premium reissue, the HM2W Wazacraft, just to meet the demand. Let that sink in for a second. A pedal players threw away by the thousands, a pedal that was a genuine joke for 2 solid decades, became so wanted that the company put it back into production years later, and the originals now command prices that would have seemed insane to the people who tossed them. Nobody saw the goldmine because everybody was too busy laughing. The HM2 is the perfect way to close this list, because it proves the whole point. The crowd is not a reliable guide. The crowd is a herd, and the herd is almost always late. The players who held on to their dusty old Japanese HM2 didn't do it because they were smarter than everyone else. They did it because they trusted what they heard over what they were told, and that one habit turned a thrown-away toy into the most wanted box on the wall. So step back and look at the pattern, because this is the part that actually saves you money. Every pedal on this list got ignored for a reason that had nothing to do with how it sounds. The DoD looked too plain. The Boss Fuzz used the wrong technology. The Soul Food was too cheap to respect. The Rat was too common to feel special. The Danelectro wore the wrong name. The Behringer was too cheap to take seriously. And the HM2 was simply unfashionable. Not one of those is a reason about tone. They're all about image, about hype, about the badge on the box. And every single time the crowd makes that mistake, there's a gold mine sitting right there in the gap between what something sounds like and what people think it's worth. That gap is where the bargains live, and it only exists because so many players refuse to look in it. The Bad Monkey story that opened all this wasn't a freak event. It happens constantly, in slow motion, with pedals sitting in your local shop right now. The only difference is that nobody's filmed the comparison yet. So the next time you're about to skip a pedal over the name on it, or the price, or what it's made of, stop and plug it in first. Trust your ears before you trust the badge. Because the players who do that are the ones quietly building incredible rigs for a fraction of the cost. And they're the ones who, years from now, will be sitting on the gold mines while everyone else is still saving up for the name. If you like this video, take a second and hit subscribe. It's free and it helps more than you know. We'll see you in the next one.